Derek Matthews leaned against the hull of his small space cruiser, staring out at the stars that blinked in the vastness of space. As a low-ranking engineer on the outskirts of the Galactic Federation, he never expected to get involved in galactic politics. His work typically involved repairing broken-down starships and calibrating fusion cores, not diplomatic entanglements. But today, things were different. "Commander Matthews," the voice of his supervisor echoed through the ship's comms. "You're needed in the briefing room immediately." Derek sighed, standing up from his restful spot. He didn't particularly enjoy being called commander, since he was more of a technical expert than a military officer, but the formality of the Federation persisted regardless. He made his way through the dimly lit corridors of his ship, wondering what sort of job they had for him now. Cassian's face remained stone-cold as she slid a holographic tablet across the table. On the screen appeared the image of Lord Xanthal himself, a towering figure with dark green scales that shimmered under the light, his reptilian eyes gleaming with intelligence. His expression was unreadable, as were most Ythraxi, whose features many other species found unsettling at best. "Lord Xanthal has a request," Cassian said carefully. "He's offering a political alliance between the Ythraxi and the Federation, and he's willing to pledge resources, technology, and military support." Derek's confusion only deepened. "That sounds like a great deal, but again, I'm an engineer. Why are we discussing this with me?" The Admiral exchanged a brief, almost uncomfortable glance with the officers. Then she took a deep breath. "He's offering his daughter's hand in marriage." The room fell silent as Derek blinked, processing the weight of her words. "His daughter's hand in marriage?" he repeated, not entirely sure he had heard correctly. "To me? Yes," Admiral Cassian confirmed, her voice now tinged with a hint of discomfort. "His only daughter, Arisa, has come of age. In Ythraxi tradition, forming alliances through marriage is one of the most sacred customs. Xanthal has chosen you, Derek." Derek felt the room start to spin. Of all the things he had imagined happening in his life, becoming part of a political marriage to an alien he'd never met had never crossed his mind. He wasn't even remotely interested in politics or diplomacy. He was a mechanic, for crying out loud. "Why me?" he managed to ask, still in shock. "The Ythraxi have a peculiar way of selecting matches," one of the other officers chimed in. "They prize technical skill and engineering expertise, among other things. Lord Xanthal believes you would be a suitable partner for Arisa." Derek felt his stomach knot. He had heard stories of Arisa, although they were mostly rumors whispered between those familiar with Ythraxi culture. She was considered unattractive even by her own species standards. Large, lumpy scales, awkwardly shaped facial ridges, and dull brown eyes that lacked the gleaming vibrancy of most Ythraxi. Many described her as a political burden, a daughter who could never find a proper suitor because of her appearance. And now Derek was supposed to marry her? "This can't be serious," Derek said, shaking his head. "You're asking me to marry an alien one that I've never met, just to secure some political alliance?" Cassian nodded. "I understand how you feel, Derek. But this is an unprecedented opportunity. The Federation has struggled to build a solid alliance with the Ythraxi for years. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours, and their resources could strengthen our defenses tenfold. This is a matter of galactic importance." "But I don't even know her," Derek protested. "And what if I don't agree?" "If you refuse, there may be consequences," Cassian admitted. "Lord Xanthal's offer is generous. But if he feels insulted, it could strain our relationship with the Ythraxi even further." Derek stood there, frozen in disbelief. It was one thing to be thrust into a difficult situation as part of his duty, but this was personal. His life, his future. He wasn't sure if he could just accept this fate for the sake of some political gains. "I need to meet her first," he finally said, his voice steadying as he tried to gain some semblance of control. "I can't make a decision without meeting her." Cassian nodded. "We've arranged for that. You'll be escorted to Lord Xanthal's homeworld in 3 days. I understand this is a lot to process, Derek, but I hope you can keep an open mind. We're all counting on you." As the meeting concluded and Derek left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. 3 days. In 3 days, he would be meeting the alien woman who was supposed to be his wife. Chapter 2, The First Encounter. As Derek stepped into the grand chamber of Lord Xanthal's palace, the air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation. Every breath he took felt heavier than the last, as though the entire weight of the galaxy had settled on his chest. The chamber was immense, with ceilings that seemed to stretch into the stars themselves. Massive pillars lined the walls, adorned with intricate carvings depicting Ythraxi history and ancient battles. The room was dimly lit by the glowing blue energy crystals embedded into the stone walls, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the floor. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a raised platform draped in woven silks and furs, was Arisa. Derek's heart hammered in his chest as he took in the sight of her. The rumors, as it turned out, had not been entirely exaggerated. Arisa was, by most conventional standards, alien or human unattractive. Her features were sharp and severe, with a broad, angular face that seemed too large for her otherwise slender frame. Her skin was a deep green, covered in rough, uneven scales that shimmered in the low light but lacked the smooth, polished appearance of the Ythraxi elite. Her eyes were small and dull, a muddy brown that seemed to sink into the darkness of her face, and her mouth was a narrow slit, lined with jagged, uneven teeth. Yet despite her appearance, there was something about the way she carried herself that gave Derek pause. She sat with her back straight, her posture regal, her head held high. There was a quiet confidence in her that contrasted sharply with the rumors he had heard. She was not the timid outcast he had imagined, but rather a woman who seemed keenly aware of her place in the world, regardless of how others viewed her. Lord Xanthel's voice broke the silence. "Commander Derek Matthews, may I present my daughter, Arisa of the Ythraxi?" Arisa's eyes locked onto Derek's, and for a moment he felt as though she were studying him, weighing his worth with a single glance. Her gaze was intense, almost predatory, as though she could see through the layers of human formality and tradition, right to the core of who he was. Derek took a deep breath and approached the platform, his footsteps echoing through the vast chamber. He felt the eyes of the Ythraxi delegation watching his every move, waiting to see how he would react, how he would handle the situation. His mind raced, searching for the right words, the proper greeting. But all the training in diplomacy he had received over the past few days seemed to slip away in the presence of this alien woman. "Lady Arisa," he said, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of respect, "it is an honor to meet you." Arisa's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, her mouth curving into what might have been a smirk, though it was difficult to tell with her alien features. "An honor?" she repeated, her voice low and surprisingly melodic. "I wonder, human, do you truly mean that? Or do you merely say it because it is expected of you?" Derek blinked, caught off guard by her directness. He had expected a more formal introduction, perhaps a scripted exchange of pleasantries, but Arisa was wasting no time in cutting through the facade. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. I suppose I've said it because it is what is expected," he admitted, deciding that honesty might be the best approach. "But I don't believe that makes it any less true." Arisa tilted her head slightly, regarding him with a curious expression. "Interesting. Most who meet me find little to honor in my presence." Derek shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. He had been warned not to comment on her appearance, but the topic seemed to hang in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. He could see now why so many suitors had rejected her. Her looks were unconventional even by Ythraxi standards, but something about her intrigued him. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, or the sharpness of her intellect that shone through her words. "I don't believe honor is found in appearances," Derek said carefully. "It's found in strength, in character, and in the choices we make." Arisa's eyes flickered with something amusement, perhaps, or maybe a hint of approval. "You speak like a diplomat," she said, her voice soft but edged with a hint of challenge. "But I wonder, Commander Matthews, do you truly believe that? Or are you simply saying what you think I wish to hear?" Derek opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Lord Xanthel interjected. "Enough, Arisa. The commander is here as a guest, and he has come to meet you in good faith." Arisa's gaze lingered on Derek for a moment longer, before she inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. "Very well, Father." Lord Xanthel turned to Derek. "You will have time to get to know one another in the coming days. For now, we must proceed with the formalities." The formalities. Derek had almost forgotten the real reason he was here. The marriage. The thought made his stomach churn. He still couldn't wrap his mind around the idea of marrying someone he had only just met, especially under such unusual circumstances. But the weight of the Federation's expectations and the potential consequences of refusing loomed large in his mind. He wasn't just making a decision for himself. He was making a decision that could affect the entire future of human Ythraxi relations. As the evening wore on, Derek was guided through a series of elaborate rituals, each one designed to solidify the bond between him and Arisa in the eyes of the Ythraxi people. He knelt before a blazing energy crystal, offered a ceremonial gift to Lord Xanthal, and recited vows in a language he barely understood. All the while, Arisa watched him with those piercing, unreadable eyes, her expression never wavering. By the time the ceremony concluded, Derek felt as though he had been through a gauntlet. His mind was spinning, and his emotions were a tangled mess of confusion, anxiety, and something else. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. As the guests began to disperse, Lord Xanthal approached Derek and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have done well, Commander. The alliance between our people is now sealed. From this day forward, you and Arisa are bound as one." Derek nodded, though the reality of the situation still hadn't fully sunk in. Bound as one, married, to an alien. He glanced over at Arisa, who was speaking with one of the Ythraxi elders. For the first time, Derek allowed himself to really look at her, not through the lens of preconceived notions or societal expectations, but as a person. There was something about her, something that intrigued him, though he couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was her intelligence, or the way she had challenged him during their conversation, or maybe it was something deeper, something he hadn't yet discovered. Whatever it was, Derek realized that this was his life now. For better or for worse, he was bound to Arisa, and there was no turning back. Chapter 3. Beyond Appearances. The days following the ceremony passed in a blur of diplomatic meetings, formal receptions, and endless discussions about the future of human Ythraxi relations. Derek found himself constantly surrounded by high-ranking officials from both sides, each of them eager to solidify the alliance that had been forged through his marriage to Arisa. It was exhausting, both physically and mentally, and Derek often found himself yearning for the simplicity of his former life as an engineer. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Arisa. Despite their unconventional start, Derek found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. At first, it was simply curiosity. He wanted to understand her, this alien woman who had been thrust into his life under such strange circumstances. But the more time he spent with her, the more he began to see beyond her appearance. Arisa was in many ways the complete opposite of what Derek had imagined. She was sharp-witted, fiercely independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. She had a deep understanding of Ythraxi politics and culture, and she often challenged Derek's assumptions about her people and their ways. She wasn't shy or insecure, as the rumors had suggested. Instead, she was confident in who she was, even if others didn't always see her value. At first, their conversations were formal and stilted, as they both navigated the awkwardness of their new relationship. But as the days passed, they began to open up to each other. Derek shared stories of his life as an engineer, the challenges he had faced working on the Federation's outer colonies, and his dreams of one day building his own starship. Arisa, in turn, told him about her childhood, growing up in the shadow of her father's power, and the pressures she had faced as the daughter of Lord Xanthal. "I was never what they wanted me to be," she admitted one evening as they sat together in the palace gardens. The twin suns of Ythraxi Prime had just set, casting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "My appearance. It has always been a burden. My people value beauty, and I have never been considered beautiful." Derek frowned, glancing at her. "That's a shallow way to judge someone." Arisa shrugged. "Perhaps, but it is the way of my people. I have long since accepted it." Derek hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had heard similar sentiments from other Ythraxi. Their culture placed a great deal of importance on physical appearance, particularly among the ruling class. But the more he got to know Arisa, the more he realized that her worth went far beyond her looks. "I don't think you're ugly," he said finally, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. Arisa glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you mean that? Or are you just trying to make me feel better?" Derek met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I mean it. You're different, sure, but I don't think that's a bad thing." For a moment, Arisa didn't say anything. Then slowly, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was the first genuine smile Derek had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. Her eyes, usually so dull and lifeless, seemed to brighten, and her sharp features softened ever so slightly. "Thank you, Derek," she said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." From that moment on, something shifted between them. The tension that had lingered in the air since their first meeting began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie. They spent more time together, talking late into the night about everything from galactic politics to personal dreams. Arisa even began to show Derek some of the more hidden aspects of Ythraxi culture, ancient rituals and traditions that few outsiders had ever witnessed. One evening, she took him to the highest point of the palace, where a large circular platform overlooked the entire city. From there, they could see the sprawling metropolis below, its streets illuminated by the glowing energy crystals that powered the Yathraxi civilization. "This is where my people come to reflect," Arisa explained as they stood at the edge of the platform, gazing out at the breathtaking view. "It is a place of peace, away from the politics and the expectations." Derek nodded, taking in the sight. "It's beautiful." Arisa smiled, a soft, almost wistful expression crossing her face. "Yes, it is." They stood there in silence for a while, the cool night air brushing against their skin. For the first time since his arrival on Yathraxi Prime, Derek felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had been so focused on the pressures of the alliance, the expectations placed upon him, that he had forgotten to simply appreciate the moment. As he stood there beside Arisa, he realized that perhaps this marriage wasn't the curse he had once thought it to be. In fact, it might just be the beginning of something entirely unexpected. Chapter 4. The Unforeseen Legacy. The months passed quickly on Yathraxi Prime, and Derek found himself more and more entangled in the politics of the Yathraxi elite. What had begun as a marriage of convenience and arrangement forged for the sake of diplomacy had evolved into something far deeper. Derek and Arisa had become partners in the truest sense of the word, not just in the eyes of their respective governments, but in their personal lives as well. They worked together to strengthen the alliance between the Yathraxi and the Federation, using their unique positions to bridge the gap between their two peoples. Arisa's sharp mind and deep understanding of Yathraxi culture made her an invaluable asset in negotiations, while Derek's practical knowledge of technology and human innovation helped to introduce new ideas and strategies. But it wasn't just in the political arena that their bond grew. Over time, Derek found himself falling for Arisa in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her wit, her intelligence, her fierce independence, all of these qualities drew him to her. And as he got to know her better, he began to see a beauty in her that went far beyond her physical appearance. It wasn't the kind of beauty that others might recognize immediately. It was subtle, hidden beneath the surface, in the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, in the warmth of her laughter when she let her guard down, in the fire that burned in her eyes when she spoke passionately about something she believed in. To Derek, she was beautiful, and though he hadn't expected it, he realized that he loved her. The realization hit him one evening as they sat together in the palace gardens, watching the twin suns set over the horizon. They had been discussing plans for the upcoming negotiations with the Federation, but as the conversation shifted to more personal matters, Derek found himself unable to focus. His mind kept wandering back to the feelings he had been wrestling with for weeks, the growing affection he felt for Arisa, the way his heart seemed to skip a beat every time she smiled at him. "Derek?" Arisa's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. She was watching him with a curious expression, her head tilted slightly to one side. "You've been awfully quiet. Is something on your mind?" Derek hesitated, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. This wasn't the kind of conversation he had ever imagined having with an alien woman, especially not one he had been forced to marry for political reasons. But now, sitting here with her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Arisa," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I need to tell you something." She raised an eyebrow, her expression still curious but now tinged with a hint of concern. "What is it?" Derek took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "When we first met, I'll admit, I didn't know what to expect. I was confused, unsure of this whole situation, but over the past few months, I've gotten to know you, and I've come to realize that you're incredible." Arisa blinked, clearly taken aback by his words. "Incredible? I don't understand." Derek smiled, his gaze softening as he looked into her eyes. "You're strong, intelligent, brave. You challenge me in ways I never thought possible. And I think I've fallen in love with you." For a moment, Arisa said nothing. Her eyes widened in surprise, and Derek could see the gears turning in her mind as she processed his words. The silence stretched between them, heavy with uncertainty, and Derek's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for her response. Finally, Arisa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You love me?" Derek nodded, his heart in his throat. "Yes, I do." Arisa's expression was a mixture of disbelief and something else, something softer, more vulnerable. She looked away for a moment, her gaze shifting to the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight were disappearing behind the mountains. When she finally turned back to him, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I never thought anyone could love me," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Not after everything. Not after all the rejections." Derek reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You're not unlovable, Arisa. Far from it. I see you for who you truly are, and I love everything about you." Arisa's grip tightened around his hand, and for the first time since they had met, Derek saw a crack in her usually stoic facade. The walls she had built around herself, the armor she wore to protect herself from the judgment of others, it all seemed to melt away in that moment, leaving only the woman beneath. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Derek replied softly. "Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat there in silence for a long time, their hands still entwined, as the night sky above them filled with stars. For the first time since their marriage had been arranged, Derek felt at peace. This was no longer just a political alliance, or a duty he had to fulfill. This was something real, something that mattered, and as they sat together beneath the stars, Derek knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their journey was far from over, but now, it was a journey they would take side by side, partners, allies, and perhaps in time, something even more.